Hey everybody. Today's topic is going to be something I haven't really talked about in the past, and that is forge welding. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about pattern welding, but this is applicable to essentially all types of forge welding. I get a lot of people asking me, how does forge welding work? And in some sense, I think a better question is, how does it not work? Iron naturally wants to come together, stick together, become a single unit. That's just the way that iron works. It's how most metals work. Possibly all metals, but I'm going to just stick with most metals. But I can't say absolutely for certain. But the way that the atoms in iron are arranged, they want to come together, form a continuous whole. Why might that not work? The biggest culprit in why that doesn't work are oxides. So iron oxide on the surface, suddenly those iron atoms can't come close enough together to form a continuous whole. That oxide is in the way. So pretty much everything that you know about how pattern welding works or how forge welding works is really about getting rid of that barrier in between. It's not doing anything special to the iron itself. It is removing the barrier between the iron atoms. The other barrier between, that is in the way of iron welding to itself, becoming a single whole, is simply distance. So if we have two uneven surfaces, then they aren't going to easily come together and bring those atoms close enough to join. And that's kind of our second main barrier. The second main reason why forge welding doesn't work. The surfaces don't actually come close enough together. So almost everything that we learn about how to forge weld is about overcoming those two barriers. So it's either how to get rid of the oxides, or it is how to bring those surfaces close together. So let's think about that for a second. One thing that a lot of us know about forge welding is that it works best when you clean those surfaces, so grind them and make them as flat as possible so that those surfaces can come, bam, as close together as possible. We've ground off the oxides. Now we've brought the surfaces together. There is one kind of issue with that, which is that as soon as we grind the surface, it's going to actually oxidize again. It won't visibly oxidize, but very quickly you're going to have a film of oxides on that surface. They aren't the heavy oxides, and that is helpful, but they're still there. So if we ground those surfaces and then gave it a minute and then pressed it together crazy hard, they're still not going to weld very well. They might weld in some spots, but they're not going to weld particularly effectively. Another thing that a lot of us know about forge welding is that if you put it in a canister, that helps. And obviously it does help. And the reason that it helps is that it excludes oxygen. So once you've got that steel encased in a canister, the atmosphere is excluded, and we're not, at the very least, we won't be forming new oxides inside that canister. But you have to wonder, why don't we form new oxides in that canister? We're getting the steel hot. Most people who do canister welds leave a pinhole, because if you don't leave a pinhole, sometimes the canister puffs up like a balloon. Sometimes it explodes, never fun. But even just puffing up like a balloon makes things a lot trickier when you're then trying to weld what's inside that balloon. So you've got a pinhole, so what keeps oxygen from getting in there? Anybody who knows their thermodynamics knows that when you heat gases, they expand. So theoretically, when you take that canister, you put it in the forge, it begins heating, the gases inside will continue to expand for as long as it is getting hotter. Once it reaches temperature, however, it would theoretically, you would stop having that expansion, and a different mechanism would take over, which is any oxygen that remained in the canister would combine with iron. It would oxidize the surface, and that removes some gas from inside the canister, creating a vacuum. So once you are at temperature, if we were just looking at the heat expansion of gases, once the canister reached equilibrium, it would, temperature-wise, it would actually develop a vacuum and begin pulling atmosphere in. Now this doesn't happen. Why does this not happen? It doesn't happen for a very simple reason, that the steels that we are welding have carbon in them. It's been a long, something that, again, we all know about forge welding, that it is typically easier to forge weld higher carbon steels than lower carbon steels. One thing about very, very low carbon steels is you can get them quite hot, and we'll perhaps get into that later in the video. But higher temperatures can be helpful for certain reasons. The forge welding temperature of higher carbon steels is generally known to be lower. And the reason for that is the carbon. Why does the carbon make a difference? Well, carbon in hot steel doesn't stay in one place. It's constantly moving around. So when you have oxides on the surface of the steel, carbon is diffusing from inside the steel, reacting with those oxides on the surface, and breaking them down. They actually turn back into pure iron and carbon dioxide, or carbon monoxide, more typically, at the temperatures we're talking about. So now you have a gas, it floats away. Also, importantly, now you have a gas. It is expanding. You are creating new gas inside the canister. So what that means is you always have positive pressure inside the canister. Some of you may have noticed, if you're doing a canister weld, that at the pinhole there is a very small blue flame coming out. And that is carbon monoxide burning off. Carbon monoxide is in fact quite flammable. So as it comes out, it burns. And what's happening here is that carbon is actually cleaning the steel. If you have fairly tight layers, then and also are working at a high enough temperature, the carbon diffusing to the surface of the steel creates carbon monoxide between the layers and maintains positive pressure between the layers. So if you've seen somebody do a no-flux weld, not in a canister, it's just stacked up, put it in the forge, let it soak some, squeeze it. If you've seen somebody do that, this is the mechanism that makes that possible. If you have done a flux weld, where you've got your layers here, you put your flux on, you heat it up, at a certain point, the flux melts on nice, looks, it's been described as sort of a honey-like look, which, I'll go for that. And you start to get bubbles coming between the layers. Now, what everybody's been told is that is the flux activated. And that's not true. That isn't the case. Those bubbles are carbon monoxide coming out from between the layers. So when the flux is active, what you're actually seeing is that the steel, or the carbon in the steel, is active. You've reached a high enough temperature The carbon is diffusing more quickly to the surface and breaking down the oxides, creating carbon monoxide. This is what cleans the steel. If you do, say, silver or copper work, and you put flux on the silver or copper, well, you put that flux on, you heat it up, bam, it looks beautiful, clean. That is flux acting on the surface. If you do the same with steel, unless the steel was already clean, your flux doesn't actually have that much effect. You don't put flux onto, a oxidized iron surface and say, damn, now it looks clean. And this is because the borax fluxes, not to say they don't do anything, I'm not trying to say they're not doing anything, but they aren't having the same effect that we see on the non-ferrous alloys. Flux on steel is to a much greater degree simply a barrier against oxidation. You're still looking at a case where the carbon within the steel is cleaning the surface of the steel. So we've heated our steel up. We've allowed the carbon within the steel to clean the oxides off the surface. And now we squeeze it together, forge it together, and that is where our surfaces, they will deform. They're malleable now. They will deform to match each other. And that is where we get the forge welding. Now, there have been experiments done in the vacuum of space where they have taken two pieces of steel and they have polished them and then just put them together. Not at extreme temperatures, not with extreme force, just put them together and they weld. Now, this is obviously they've polished them and they're perfectly flat, so they've overcome that distance between. At the atomic level, it doesn't take much distance for there to be distance. So these were polished extremely flat, put together. There were no oxides because there's no atmosphere. So after polishing, you have bare iron. Put that together, bam, it welds. And the same thing is really happening anytime we forge weld down here on Earth. We just have to take additional precautions or use different methods to allow that to happen. So why are things like stainless steel a lot harder to weld? Well, the reason for that is that stainless steel has much more persistent oxides, much more stable oxides. Specifically, I'm talking about chromium oxides. Chromium is a very, very reactive metal, and the oxides that it forms are extremely durable. And they are stable up to high enough temperatures that it's incredibly difficult, or shouldn't say incredibly difficult, it is much more difficult to achieve those temperatures, the temperatures necessary to start breaking down those oxides, without exceeding the forging range of the steel in question. And this is why the forge welding of stainless steel is typically done in a very different way than the forge welding of carbon steel. Other methods need to be brought in that help break down those oxides so that, or help flush them out, let's say, in such a fashion that you can get everything clean without exceeding the forging temperature of the steel that you're trying to weld. So again, the basics of forge welding are simply clean steel, so oxide-free. Obviously, other things could be on there, but oxide-free, and bringing those surfaces close together, bringing them into an intimate situation so that the atoms can actually bond with each other. And the main player in all of the systems that we use is carbon. So when you're going to weld up your billet, that's what you need to be keeping in mind is Is my carbon, am I giving my carbon the opportunity to do its job? And if a weld fails, that's where you can start, is looking at, well, what maybe came between my layers? What caused this process to fail? Thanks for watching, and obviously if you have any questions, you can drop them in the comments. I will also be doing additional videos in which I answer questions. So if I don't answer your question in the comment, that's because I'm planning on putting it into a future video. So thanks for watching, and I hope this helps.